COVID in the Oval Office as Ohioans get ready to vote. Joining us on Columbus on the Record this week, Joe Ingles, State House reporter for Ohio Public Radio, Mark Weaver, Republican strategist, and Dale Butlin, Democratic strategist. Just when you thought the political world had experienced it all, President Trump tests positive for the coronavirus. The president's 1 a.m. tweet that he and the First Lady tested positive for that virus causes COVID boosted uncertainty over the governance of the nation in the last month of the presidential campaign. The test result brought well wishes for the president, but also criticism for the refusal of him and those close to him to wear masks and take precautions to prevent the spread of COVID. Dale Butlin, you have worked in government and run campaigns and worked on campaigns for a long time. What does this do to both?
Well, first off, let me say that all decent people of goodwill are praying for the president and his wife and hoping that they have a quick recovery. But that doesn't mean you can't also be angry at the president's reckless behavior, his mocking of Joe Biden for wearing a mask at the debate this week, and his refusal to either take this virus seriously or do the things that his own health experts say is necessary to wrestle it to the ground. I mean, it's why the U.S. is the only country in the world whose unemployment rate literally tripled, and why we now have more COVID deaths than any other country on the planet. From a purely political point of view, I think what this means is that COVID and the president's horribly bungled response to it will now be front and center for the last 30 days of this campaign. The election will now be largely a referendum on the president's handling of the pandemic, and that is the last thing that Trump and his campaign want.
Mark Weaver, anyone can get this virus, but the president is very protected. You'd think he'd be safe. Is it because he did not take the necessary precautions and his staff did not take the necessary precautions that made himself vulnerable?
Well, him wearing a mask wouldn't be an issue because we're told that we should wear a mask so we don't infect other people, not vice versa, of course. But the notion of blaming people who get sick seems to me to be both counterproductive and particularly incivil. I think most of us know people who've gotten this virus. Everyone I know who's gotten it has survived. We got a 95 to 99% survival rate. Let's start with Dale's first comment. Let's all pray for their recovery, and the politics will work itself out. All of us are doing work remotely. We're doing it remotely here. The president will campaign remotely.
Of course, we are recording this on a Friday afternoon, so things can change by the time this airs. But Joe Ingles, the Governor DeWine, had a news conference on Friday afternoon where he also wished the president well and stressed that people should wear masks. He was not in Cleveland for the debate. Lieutenant Governor Jon Husted was. Other Ohio politicians were as well, and they are awaiting tests as we speak right now.
They are. And some doctors are saying that actually, if it was at the debate the other day, that there's not enough time to really get an accurate test. So they'll probably be tested again in the coming days to see if they actually have COVID. I don't think one negative test right now can actually prove it one way or another. But, back to the point you're talking about, I think, the thing with masks is what we've got to take into consideration is that some people do die from COVID. And, if you can wear a mask, it's just a nice thing to do for other people. Whether it's mandated or not, it's a nice thing to do.
Dale Butler, what does this mean for the campaign? I mean, should Joe Biden, he tested negative on Friday morning, should he stop campaigning? Should he not? He wasn't holding the big rallies anyway, but should he not go out into the public? Should he not run negative ads until we know how President Trump, how his health turns out?
I think that you can campaign, certainly. And I think that the president, unfortunately for him, is going to be off the campaign trail now for probably a week and a half to even more. The quarantine lasts for 10 to 14 days. There's only 30 days left in this campaign. So I don't see any reason that Joe Biden has to stop campaigning. As you say, unlike President Trump, he doesn't do big rallies with people packed shoulder to shoulder and with no mask. I think that Biden's events have been safe. He's done everything that the experts have said you should do. I want to go back to something though that we said earlier, because President Trump has almost single-handedly turned mask wearing in the middle of a pandemic into a culture war issue that's gotten so crazy that just last week at a Trump rally in Dayton, Governor DeWine and Lieutenant Governor Husted, both of whom are Republicans, were booed by the crowd when they asked them to wear masks. That is how crazy this has gotten.
Mark Weaver, do you think this will change the president's attitude on mask wearing? You say that, of course, mask wearing keeps other people safe, but he's the role model. And from what we understand, nobody in the West Wing, the closest advisors to the president, were wearing masks, and that possibly is how he contracted the virus. Will his attitude on mask wearing change? Will the attitude of his supporters change after this incident?
The president has been encouraging the public to wear masks for months. Once the CDC changed its mind on masks back in March or so, when they went from no mask to mask, the president has not only encouraged people, but warned them. In fact, at the debate, the president immediately showed the mask he had been wearing earlier that night. We didn't see Biden do that. So I think the mask thing is largely just another symptom of the culture war, another reason for us to be angry at one another when we ought to be looking for a way to be more united as a country.
He mocked the president. The president mocked Joe Biden for wearing a mask during that debate. He says he's always wearing a mask. He wears a mask bigger than I am. He wasn't exactly saying wear a mask like Joe does. He wasn't praising Joe Biden for wearing a mask.
Talking about wearing a mask when appropriate, and there are times when Joe Biden is outside, nowhere near any other people, and wearing a mask. There's no science that says that's needed when you're outside and nowhere near any people. Masks are for other settings. When you're inside, when you can't socially distance. The president was making a nuanced point, and I think the science backs him up on that.
All right, let's get to the debate. We are still waiting to hear if President Trump was contagious when he shared the debate stage with Joe Biden Tuesday night in Cleveland. If he was, that would be a topper to what most agree was an unprecedented, ugly affair.
The issue is the American people should speak. Vote now.
You're gonna pack the
Make
court?
sure you, in fact, let people know
He doesn't
you're
wanna
a
answer the
senator.
question.
I'm not going to answer the question.
If you say those words, you're going to lose all of your radical left supporters.
My
Medicine
party is
and
me.
socialist
Right
healthcare.
now, I am
and
the
they're going to
Democratic
dominate
Party.
you, Joe. You know that.
You're
And by
the
way,
worst
you were a
president
vice-
America has ever had.
Hey,
Come
Joe,
on.
let me just tell you, Joe. I've done more in 47 months. I've done more than you've done in 47 years, Joe.
That was just a few of the exchanges. Other lowlights included Joe Biden calling the president a clown and telling him to shut up, President Trump saying Biden was not smart, and the president refusing to condemn white supremacists on the debate stage. He later did 2 days later. Mark Weaver, most agree that President Trump was the aggressor in that debate, that the polls show, taken immediately after the debate, that President Trump lost, Joe Biden won. Does this hurt? How much does this hurt the president, his debate performance?
Yeah, I disagree with several of your premises. The first word out of his mouth about white supremacy was sure he condemns them. He's condemned them for years, numerous times. Joe Biden has not condemned Richard Spencer, the white supremacist who endorsed Joe Biden. Joe Biden, of course, was against school integration because he didn't want his kids to be in a racial jungle. So I disagree with that premise, but there was too much interrupting. It started with Joe Biden, who interrupted 3 times. The first one to interrupt somebody, that was wrong. I think it was wrong for both candidates to interrupt one another. Folks want to hear each side talk, and I hope that next debate there'll be less of that. But I don't think
Mark,
it's
let me stop
clear
you
at
there.
all that
It
Joe
was
Biden
clear.
won that
It was
debate.
clear to anyone watching that debate that President Trump was the over-aggressive person on that stage. How can you say that it was both sides when it was clearly at least 2/3 President Trump being the aggressor?
Well, I think he was more aggressive. There's no doubt about it, largely because the premises of some of the questions from Chris Wallace were false and were slanted against Donald Trump. So he reacted. But the notion of Joe Biden beginning the interrupting, remember, this is the same Joe Biden that in his debate against Paul Ryan for vice president, interrupted Paul Ryan 82 times in the last debate that Joe Biden did in a general election. So he's got a penchant for interrupting. I think both of them did, and I think the next debate ought to be a little more civil.
If that happens. Dale Butlin, I take it you disagree.
Well, not only was Mark not watching the same debate that everybody else was, now we find out that even the debate host who works at Fox News was somehow against President Trump. This victimization thing has just gotten completely out of hand. But look, because every major poll shows Trump not just losing nationally, but also tied or behind in every swing state, this debate was his last best chance to change the trajectory of the race and turn things around. And he flat out blew it by giving the most appalling and disgraceful debate performance in American history. These bully boy tactics he used not only failed to shake up the race, it hurt Trump badly with the exact voters that he had to make inroads with, namely women, suburban voters, and the independents. And now, after mocking Joe Biden for wearing a mask on that debate stage, Mike, as you pointed out, the president himself has caught the virus. So with even must-win states like Ohio, Iowa, Florida, already rated as toss-ups in the polls, Trump is not only likely to lose, but maybe by a landslide in the Electoral College.
Joe Ingles, you live in suburban Columbus, the part that's usually Republican, traditionally has voted Republican, but now is seen as up for grabs, if not leaning towards Joe Biden. What are your neighbors saying up there north of Columbus?
Well, if you wanted to win suburban women, this was not the way to do it. Women up here they tuned out. They didn't even listen to the whole debate. A lot of them are telling me. I've talked to some of my neighbors and friends, and they say that, it just was too much back and forth, and they weren't addressing the issues that they care about, which are children, security, being able to have economic security for their family, being able to have a good education for their kids, the issues that they care about, COVID, actually. Those issues they felt weren't addressed. And someone had told me, they said they think the next debate should be moderated by a mom who's had to stay home with their kids since March.
Dale Butlin, Joe Biden didn't come across completely clean either. He called the president a clown. He told him to shut up. Did he harm himself by getting down in the mud with President Trump?
Well, there's that old saw, Mike, that you should never wrestle with a pig because you both get muddy and the pig likes it. And I think that's what we found here. It's true that Biden lost his temper a couple of times, but to be honest, and I think the polls are reflecting this too, you'd have to have the patience of Job not to be upset with what the president was doing throughout this debate. Now, the question that you asked was, did Biden hurt himself? Every single poll that was taken, every one of them, from CNN to all of them, showed that a significant majority of people thought Biden won that debate. So the point is, and I want to go back to this because it's really important, the real, what would be the right word? Not the nexus, but the real emphasis had to be on Trump doing something to shake up the race, to turn things around. He didn't do that. Most people thought Biden won the debate, and Trump did nothing to change the trajectory of this race, which is right now heading in Joe Biden's direction.
Mark Weaver, many election cycles have overhyped a first debate performance. We've seen it over and over again, especially when it comes to the incumbent. They usually have a poor performance in the first debate. Can Trump overcome what most agree was not his best or a poor performance in this debate?
Yeah, again, the polling and the focus groups I've seen suggest that no minds were really changed by this debate. We do know Mitt Romney beat Barack Obama in that first debate, and Romney did not win. We know that Walter Mondale probably beat Ronald Reagan in that first debate in '84, and Reagan beat him by a landslide. So my sense is if there's another debate that might be more helpful, but I don't know that this is a persuasion kind of a race. Nearly everyone in the country knows how they feel about this president, and most people know how they feel about Joe Biden. This is largely decided on the persuasion side, which means it's going to be based on who can turn out their vote, who can turn out their supporters. That's probably what's going to tell us what to win or who's going to win. The polling right now is probably as reliable or less reliable than the polling that told us we would have Hillary Clinton as president.
Joe Ingles, we'll get to more of this in a moment, but the governor the next day or 2 days later, well, right after the debate, the governor sent out a tweet that said that President Trump had done a great job. That looked like a pre-scheduled tweet because it was right at 10:45. It just looked odd. It certainly did not match the tone of the debate. 2 days later, he started off his COVID-19 briefing talking about the issues that were raised during this debate, but he wouldn't mention the president by name.
He did not. And that was odd because the reporters were trying to push him to actually come out strong against white supremacy and racism. And Governor DeWine would not mention President Trump in the same sentence, even with, he did, Governor DeWine said, hey, it's wrong. I don't like what he said. But he didn't say his name. He didn't connect him or at all. He just kind of, I don't know, he chose his words very carefully. Yeah. And that was strange.
All right. Also during the debate, the president said the election is rigged and voting by mail is rife with fraud. Both statements are not true. He also called on supporters to go to the polls on Election Day to look for what he suggests will be irregularities, while not criticizing the man who is casting unfounded doubts on the election. Governor DeWine promised a fair process here in Ohio.
We will not tolerate any interference in this sacred process. We will, as we have done in the past, protect each citizen's right to vote and to have their vote counted.
But there are mixed messages, Joe Ingles, from the president and the governor. Who do Ohioans believe?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know who Ohioans believe, actually. I think there are mixed messages, and that's part of the problem right now. Ohioans are saying that a lot of them are hearing these stories about mail-in balloting, and they're afraid of that, and they're talking, yet they might be afraid of it, but more than 2 million Ohioans have signed up to get absentee ballots. So, I mean, there's a lot of things going on here that people feel like it's just out of control, and they don't know what they're facing. They don't know exactly what the problems are with this election, and they're worried.
Mark Weaver, will the rest of the country have a fair vote between now and November 3rd?
Here's hoping. I've been an election lawyer for 2 decades, and I know you're a careful reporter, Mike, and I know you didn't mean to imply that the president was saying that all absentee ballots are rife for fraud. What he specifically said in that debate was unsolicited ballots sent out to people who didn't even ask for mail-in ballots all throughout the postal system is a bad idea. Ohio doesn't do that. That's why we're not going to have a problem in Ohio, because you have to ask for the ballot. But in the handful of states that simply send out ballots to everybody, whether they're still living at that address or not, that's too many ballots in the hands of people who can misuse them.
Other states do that, Mark. Other states do send out ballots, and they have not seen the widespread fraud or rigging that the president says he fears.
Well, fraud and fraud is bad in any number. Just like, we've had protests in the country. Less than 20 African Americans were shot by police last year who were unarmed, but we think that's a big number. We don't get upset that it's widespread. A lot of people protest because even though it was less than 20, they're mad about the principle. And so any voter fraud is bad, and sending out unsolicited ballots to whoever might still be living at a particular address is a bad idea. That's why Ohio doesn't do it. The president wasn't talking about Ohio's absentee balloting. He was talking about those states that send out the ballots to people who haven't asked for them.
Joe Butler, what about that? Is there a risk there in other states? I'm not sure which states are doing it, are sending out, no, some states have done it for a long time. Utah, I think, is one. Oregon, Washington have sent out ballots for a long time. Is there really a danger in just sending out ballots if you're not sure the person lives there? You're not sure if they're even dead or alive?
Absolutely not. As you started to say a moment ago, 4 states have done all mail-in balloting now for years. And that goes from Democratic Oregon to ruby red Republican Utah. And they send out ballots to all registered voters. They have had no fraud. Well, let me put it to you this way. What they have found is that the chances of a voter participating in fraud are less than being struck by lightning. So this whole thing is just a crock. President Trump has tried to cast doubt on this election from the very beginning. He has said that he won't accept any result unless he wins. And for him to cast doubt on this process, I think is scurrilous. It is not something any president has ever done before, and it's certainly not something that should be done now. There is no voter fraud to speak of in this country, not in the state of Ohio, not in the state of Pennsylvania, not in Utah, not in Oregon, not anywhere.
Mark Weaver, would you agree that if there is voter fraud in it, and there have been cases of it, there was a case in North Carolina not too long ago, in fact involved a Republican office holder. Would you agree that it's pretty small? John Husted said it's small. Do you think it's a relatively small problem?
And I think it is. I pointed out to you that the number of unarmed African Americans shot by police last year was less than 20. That's a relatively small problem, but a lot of people are worried about it. So the president raising the notion of voter fraud is fair. Ohio has a pretty secure system. I like Ohio's system, but even in 2004, when I was counsel for the Republican Party in the election that year, Bush versus Kerry, we saw numerous instances of people trying to get access to ballots that didn't deserve them.
How numerous? How numerous?
Oh,
Do you have a number?
I did a press conference standing in front of a mountain of people who had made requests for voter registrations. It came back no such person, and the request had been made in the last month. There was thousands of them. People who claimed to have said to register an address, and then it came back undeliverable, nobody there by that name. So is it a big deal? No, particularly not in Ohio. We got a pretty good system. The president was not criticizing absentee voting the way we do it in Ohio. He was criticizing the notion of sending ballots to anybody, whether you still live there or not.
All right, our last topic. She has not been even questioned by the Senate Judiciary Committee, but Ohio abortion rights opponents are planning for the day when the Supreme Court nominee Amy Barrett votes to overturn Roe versus Wade. This week, the group Ohio Right to Life announced lawmakers will soon consider a so-called trigger law. Such a law would ban Ohio abortions at the hypothetical moment the Supreme Court overturns the decision that legalized it. The law would ban abortion from the moment of conception, except when the life of the mother is in danger. Of course, Amy Barrett has not been confirmed yet. There is no serious challenge to Roe before the U.S. Supreme Court, and there is no guarantee that even a conservative court would overturn it. So, Joe Ingles, will lawmakers consider this right away?
I think they will. They have shown that they will. And if you look at who's bringing this, it's the Senate president this time, Larry Obhoff. The Senate has always been the more conservative of the two chambers when it comes to abortion bills and things of that nature. It's been the House that's usually out there pushing the more conservative, more controversial abortion laws. But this abortion law would serve as a trigger so that the minute that the Supreme Court did come up with a way to invalidate Roe versus Wade, and we don't know that that would happen, you're exactly right about that, but if it did happen, they want to make sure that Ohio can no longer have abortion options for women, except for that one exception for their the safety of the mother.
Mark Weaver, a 2019 poll showed that 61% of Ohioans support Roe versus Wade. They support legal abortion with restrictions. Is the legislature out of step if they approve this trigger law?
They're not out of step with Ohio because Ohioans sent these folks to the House and the Senate to represent them, and they'd get a chance every 2 years to replace them. And so I don't think they're out of step at all. But if the Supreme Court were to strike down Roe versus Wade, and nobody thinks that's happening anytime soon, it would simply take the policy and move it back to each state. California would always have abortions. Massachusetts, 20 or 25 states would always have abortion available, and other states wouldn't. And that's true about a lot of policy in America right now. You can do some things in one state, you can't do other things in other states.
Of course, if you're low income Dale Butler and you live in one of those states that doesn't have it, you can't have access to it.
Yeah, look, this is why ramming this court pick through this close to the election may well cost Mitch McConnell his Senate majority. Not only is this probably lights out for Republican senators like Collins in Maine and Gardner in Colorado, even incumbent Republican senators in states like Iowa, Georgia, the two Carolinas are now in serious jeopardy, including Lindsey Graham, whose race is now tied in South Carolina. Voters are smart enough to know that with Barrett on the court, insurance protections for pre-existing health conditions are likely gone, and Roe versus Wade, which is what we're talking about here, is likely to be overturned. Now, understand
Dale,
that if
I got to cut you off because we got to get to our off-the-record comments. We're getting low on time. We have lots to talk about. This discussion will continue. But first, off the record, Mark Weaver, you're up first.
An important issue for voters in Franklin County this year is the prosecuting attorney race. We sadly found out that the candidate who's running against Ron O'Brien, retired Judge Gary Tyak, suffered a stroke and has been in the rehabilitation hospital. He probably is not capable to do the job. He's certainly experienced and qualified, but sadly, this physical tragedy may limit his ability to do the job, and voters will have a difficult decision to make.
Judge Tyak says he is capable of doing the job and he could be an administrator. He won't have to try cases. But anyway, Dale Butlin.
just 3.5 years, Donald Trump has all but destroyed truth and trust, the two things that make democracy possible. And now that he said he won't accept the election results unless he wins, both our country and our democracy are in more danger than ever before, which is why removing Trump from office is the moral imperative of our time. This election is not about Republicans or Democrats anymore. It's about keeping America, America. So please vote. This time, it really does matter.
Joe Ingles, your last word.
Well, you know, typically in October, we look for that October surprise. I'm wondering if we're going to have an actual October surprise this year, or at least one. I mean, we might have many of them, but with people voting early and so many surprises coming so fast on so many fronts, we may not have one October surprise this year.
Yes, our surprise came on October 1st. Don't forget to check out our voter guide, wosu.org/voter guide. It shows you how to vote and gives you information on all the candidates. That is Columbus on the Record for this week. For our crew and for our panel, I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.